Starting your own venture can be a daunting move. You're choosing to break away from comfort, convenience, and the known to now chart out something of your own. Your wins are your own, but so are your challenges. However, what no one talks about enough is how founders struggle to build confidence as they grow into this role and the internal battles they face in doing so. Welcome to Let's Talk Shop by Mentorsphere, a podcast series where we have unfiltered conversations about career success, jobs, and work life. In this episode, I chat with Ayush Narang, angel investor and founder of Spark 18, which builds new age digital products and helps companies across geographies scale their engineering teams. He's a seasoned founder with 13 plus years of experience in this space and also happens to be one of my closest friends, so chatting with him was extra special for me. I'm Medha Khanna, your host, and also the founder of Startup Launchpad, a mentor-led support community for startup founders. Ayush and I compared notes on our initial journeys, and here is how that conversation went. You tell me what's happening.
Nothing. I am.
How's Saturday treating you?
Saturday is good. I am juggling between managing workouts and the game in the evening. So yeah,
These
just trying
are
to
good
keep it
problems
there.
to have.
I don't want to miss the badminton, neither do I want to miss the game. So just making sure I have those four
But
people.
I like these kind of weekend problems. These are the kind of good kind of problems to have.
Yeah, I don't talk too much about it because it's
Very first world.
yeah.
Yeah. So I got my coffee in my hand because our conversation is very, very incomplete without the
Yes.
presence of
Always.
coffee or the whiff of it somewhere.
So
Oh God, perfect. There is a telepathic connection in play.
that's exactly why I took those 5 minutes. I was like, I'm going to set up
Me
my
too.
against it. Yeah.
Super. So should we dive into it? I think there's so much to talk about, and I don't know how it's going to be possible to squeeze this into a short little window, but let's try.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
What's actually really interesting about, our conversation, and I've noticed this pattern throughout, is that we had very different starting points, right? And that's what makes this conversation particularly interesting. You started out super early, right? You were doing some entrepreneurial pursuits back in school also, and then it continued through college, and you took it forth full-fledged right after, right? So you had that quintessential first entry into entrepreneurship, and I, of course, started after, having spent a fair bit of time in the corporate world. So while the starting points might have been really different, the struggles are similar. There's a similar fabric
Yeah.
to both kinds of journeys, and this actually your and my journey in a way interestingly encompasses the entire universe of archetypes of founders out there, right? It's interesting to know that what was that early stage for you? Did you struggle with the kind of issues most founders talk about, right? Imposter syndrome, low self-confidence, constantly feeling overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that you have to do as a founder in the initial days. What was it like for you?
Just for context, obviously, I started back when I was 18. Like my today's version of what I believe is that things were fairly easy at that point in time for a few reasons. One, definitely there was no pressure of doing anything. Like
Yeah,
this was completely and completely out of will,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And then there was no opportunity cost. It wasn't like I've seen a few lakhs coming into my bank account every first, and now I'm letting to go of that or
yeah,
whatever. Like those things
yeah,
were not there.
yeah,
It was a lot more circumstantial because I found myself in an engineering college and to understand that, okay, I like building products, but I'm not the guy who's going to be coding forever. And then having grown up in a place like Delhi, for a lot of people in that all India kind of an engineering college, that exposure is great, like those 4 years of staying in a city, etc. But I already had that, right? So I didn't particularly feel excited about spending 4 years and not doing anything. And so that was the reason where I started. And of course, at that point in time, having like the drive was to be independent, not to ask for pocket money or not to take money from home was
yeah,
very important
yeah,
suddenly.
yeah,
It started back in school, like you mentioned. I made sweatshirts, we did our continuation parties, whatever, whatever, right? That gave
yeah.
me like a flavor of what it is to buy your own phone, your own laptop.
Mhm.
It started like that, but the common syndromes, the things that you talk about, I've felt that, but probably later on. But first initial 3, 4, 5 years, it was no pressure. You were always ahead of the curve because nobody else was kind of doing anything
Mm.
around in the zone. And
Mm.
entrepreneurship wasn't the cool term also around the
Yeah.
block, right? It was
Yeah, you were
like,
one of the early few people who were actually talking about it, so to speak, back in the day, right? I mean, we didn't even associate it with the term startups back then.
yeah, and that too, like even startups or like probably Flipkart and all were doing their things, but at the same point in time, the cool thing was the raising money and getting onto
Yeah.
like a show
Yeah.
where or but this was like out and out bootstrapped,
Yeah.
trying to do things. And just as luck would have it, by the end of that engineering college, I didn't find like a placement that would be able to match up to what I was already doing.
Mm.
And that's how the journey started.
I think that opportunity cost that you're speaking of is, I think, the main roadblock when you start off late, right? Because I think whenever anybody asks me, my first answer is usually it's the opportunity cost and the pressure of it that bogs you down in the initial time, right? Your there is a monetary number to what you are letting go of, and the
Yeah.
potential growth trajectory of that monetary number, right? And I think also the other thing that happens in the initial days is that there are certain career milestones that have been attached to certain times of your life, and it's sort of deeply ingrained in our socio-cultural thoughts and our thinking as a result, right? You associate a certain kind of being settled or being at a certain level in your life financially or status wise by a certain age. And getting onto an entrepreneurial trajectory basically means turning that thought process on its head and saying, I don't know what's going to take.
Kind of derails you. Yeah.
Exactly. It's
Right.
going to take 5 years. It may take 10 years. It may never happen. I might be going back to that job. God knows what it's going to be, right? In fact, when I left my job, that's what my partner also said. And he said, take your 6 months, see what
Yeah.
works for you. If it doesn't, come back. And he'd also done it and it hadn't worked and he'd gone back, right? So he kind of
Mhm.
was very sure that you're not going to last it through, you're going to come back. I think I don't what I think is interesting is that in those 6 months, obviously nothing dramatic is going to happen in 6 months. You're just about grappling with this change of environment. But I think in these 6 months, I realized that that job is not something I want to do, right? I'm enjoying the agency and autonomy of what I have right now. I can build what I want from scratch. And that agency to me was much, much more important than I think that check coming in on the first of every month. I feel like in those initial days, no one really tells you that building confidence and coming into this role and feeling like you belong here and shedding that imposter syndrome that we spoke about at the beginning is a journey. I recently was listening to this podcast by the Ken. They do a piece called First Principles. Really high quality stuff. And then one of the episodes they called, 4 or 5 leading, women founders to talk about the specificities of their entrepreneurial journey, right? So I think Soumya Rajan, who heads Waterfield Advisors, speaks about this. She's like,
Yeah.
because she left this high profile job of heading private banking at Standard Chartered, right? So, and decided to, start something of her own. So she said that, when I used to go to these social gatherings and someone used to ask me what I do, my instant reaction, of course, used to be very softly saying that, I founded this company. And then I'd see a very blank sort of poker face on the other hand.
Yeah.
And I would immediately follow it up by saying, so, hey, but I just, moved on from this role of, heading private banking at Standard Chartered, somehow feeling almost apologetic for the fact that I started out, or feeling apologetic for the fact that I've left something so high profile to start out. And then the conversation with the other person also becomes about that gig and not what you're actually doing. And I remember relating with that so much because I have done that throughout, right? For the longest time of my initial years, I used to be hesitant to talk about my founder personality. And I used to immediately suffix it with, hey, but I'm a chartered accountant, I worked at XYZ Big Four, and this is what I used to do. And it took me, and it's the biggest manifestation of imposter syndrome, right? Also, the fact that there's so much pressure from external quarters, many of which we sort of internalized, to say that validation can only come from A, external sources, and B, from the fact that I need to have achieved what society thinks is a milestone in my life for me to feel good about, my career or where I am in my life. I think it takes so long to shed it. I even remember saying things in the initial days like, I work on a project.
And
Yeah.
someone asked
Yeah.
me saying, you registered this company, right? Why is it a project? Call it a venture, call it a company, like own it. And it's something so simple and basic, but it hits you today to say that it's not a project, it's not some 2 month thing that you're doing. It's now livelihood, right?
We then went on to stage two. You've decided to start up. What are you going to have to deal with? Let's dive in.
But I think that initial 4 5 years
Yeah,
of whatever ecosystem you belong in, right,
yeah,
really builds up a character. So
100%.
now, of course, there are a bunch of times I've worked with a lot of founders, be it late stage, early stage, bootstrap companies, funded companies, all of that. What I got was at the age of, say, 23, 24, a value ecosystem that most people won't have because I've
Yeah.
spent 5 years grinding and that came in early for me. Right.
Mm.
I think that for somebody who spent 5 7 years in a corporate life will
Mm.
entail a lot of unlearning.
Yeah.
So today, for the biggest of problems, I just observe myself being a lot more calmer because there is that subtle inner voice that says what could happen, right? Like, kya
Yeah.
hi ho jayega.
Yeah.
Eventually, it's somewhere in that zone. Yeah, theek hai. Matlab, shit happens. I've seen it. It'll figure itself out. There are going to be crests and troughs. It's fine. You're going through a bad patch, but you always have that calming thing that okay, it's going to turn around. So you just sustain or you just live through the bad times and you
Yeah.
just wait for the exciting ones all the
Yeah.
time. Anybody who would pivot out a little later or like
Mm.
would a decade into working and then do that, for them that those anxious times and stressful times around work are a lot more
Yeah.
because you're not habitual of all of this coming, right? And when it comes to startups, your second nature to you becomes having newer problems every day.
Yeah.
So
100%.
more and more you're into it, it's similar to how I thought about exams. If you remember back in the day in high school,
Yeah.
you'd be super stressed about boards and all of this, right? In engineering, I used to have some 20 exams every 4 months. So
Yeah.
by like the end of it, you're like, it's a okay, today it's an exam day, today it's not an exam day.
And
That's
how
the
much
only
can you
difference.
sustain that pressure? That body and your mind can take only so much, right? I think what's interesting about what you said, Ayush, is that in the corporate world or in a more organized industry setup, there's always a shock absorber for every stage, right? So you're never really taking on the entire brunt of a major screw up that's happened, so to speak.
Yeah.
20% of the time. There are multiple shock absorbers at different stages, right? When you come into a founder role or a co-founder role or a founding team role, you are solely responsible, and it takes some time to realize that you have to reconcile to the fact that this entire ecosystem now relies on you. So you've got to now have a mindset shift to be okay with that and also be making solid decision making in the process. And it's a tough sort of a balance to strike, and it takes some time to get to that point, I think.
From my experience, what I think is you always have those drivers and they're going to be different at different points in
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
You just need to latch on and be at it, right? But it's always a moving goalpost.
Yeah.
Also, entrepreneurship, like I've also taken my stab at doing sessions at schools, talking about entrepreneurship, founder journeys, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the fact is, it's a very difficult, it's not like a course material to be taught, right? It's like
There's no
no
template
one
here.
size fits all situation. It's basically a mindset, is what I
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah.
For example, my journey initially, the latching on was about being independent, having my own money, right? Like, and I think a lot of people have that. They just don't talk about it too
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Initially, the idea and the driver of the fire in the belly is with, I'm going to create something. I'm going to give a better life to my loved ones. I'm going to make a successful life. I'm going to renowned as somebody who's done good in life, etc.
Yeah.
Over time you only become more and more financially, you learn a lot more, you understand what financial intelligence is, and then you're like, okay, it's, I thought this was my definition of being happy, but it's actually not.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
funny enough that no matter how many times you say this to anybody, people will have to do this,
Yeah.
and then only they will realize what it means,
That's true.
because what the universe will always say, or what you would listen a lot of times, it's easy to say that once you've done something, right?
Yeah.
Like it's and it's always that.
Yeah.
I think I will have a lot of envy for somebody who is starting out and who understands this. That's
Yeah.
like, I think
Yeah.
some 5 7 years already kind of
Also
saved.
learning. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But yeah, but that milestone that starts with that then goes on to maybe a certain bit of responsibility where you're like, okay, I do secure, but hey, there are these 50, 100 people who
We're dependent
probably
on
go
you.
put food on the table because
Yeah,
your company or your business does what it does, right?
yeah,
And that responsibility makes it go happen second. Third phase, like, and again, this is like no one size fits all. So for me, the third phase is about where you see indirect things that really help you in your work. You could be a capitalist. Like today, I'm thoroughly okay to skip a lot of things for my workouts or my health
yeah.
because an indirect correlation of what I do
That's
and
priority now, right? Yeah,
at my performance at work is also dependent on it.
yeah,
Just
okay.
that
So,
I don't look at it like, oh, you're going and playing badminton at the time when you could be working. So that happens. And then finally, I think it's about saying that, okay, I don't want to do all of this just from a capitalist mindset. Where can I have an impact? It's like a startup is more like it's a tribe thing, right? Like the very
yeah,
less people who are going to be understanding of what you're doing.
100%.
Plus, as we are, as the country that we are in, and we've grown in India, like it's traditionally considered stupid to leave a well-paying job and do something. And it's like, oh my God, what is wrong with you?
Yeah,
Either you
we're a
can go
plan B
get
kind of
married.
lot, right? We need to have like first take the degree, then get a job, and then be in the secure environment, and your life is set. If any aberration from that is a big, big taboo. Yeah, true. True.
It's weird, right? How traditionally people have been okay to leave their jobs to get married, but not to set up their own shop.
What a
Like it's
great.
just
That's a great observation.
also by nature you're trying to build something that has not been built before. Like
Hmm.
if you go to a true definition of what a startup is, right? You're
Yeah,
trying to solve a new problem. Now, when
exactly.
you're doing that, every person that you talk to is gonna be like, oh, you know what? I work for like the Big Four, Standard Chartered, whatever, and I go and I sit in this fancy office every day, and your idea is stupid because if this was so easy, why hasn't like my boss or my partner or whoever has
Sort
thought
of it.
about it all?
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
then it's more and more difficult, and it's actually a waste of time to justify your doings to a group of people who will never understand it because they've spent those 5, 7 years, 10 years in that life,
Yeah.
and their definition of what life is. They've already reached to a point where work is a part of my life. I work for those 6 to 8 hours. I come back home. I have a family. I have to do my sports. I have to
Yeah.
travel.
Yeah.
They're already in that balance. For an entrepreneur, I feel it takes 5 years to build up a work character first. Then
100%.
it to a stage where you're working for those 12, 16, 18 hours, whatever that is in your case, right? After that, you realize, okay, this is not healthy. I might just kill myself if I keep doing this. Then you strike that
Strike a
balance,
balance.
and
Yeah.
then you start going on to doing those things.
Yeah.
But then you realize that, okay, I have a lot more exposure because in the same 5 years, I've probably touched upon every part of a function of a large enterprise. But you still don't have internal validation that you have, because when you go and look at these corporate, whatever meetings or some releases or whatever, you'll see these jargons and you'll be like, yeah, ye baat to wahi kar raha hai, but just that he has this
There's a
ab-
three-letter acronym attached to it that I
yeah,
didn't know.
exactly. That's typically how I think
Yeah.
it is. But for me, what I saw was when I actually realized that the more and more I'll be in operation, I am going to
Mm.
become a debt. And I started to strike that balance in my life. I was really anxious at that point in time
Yeah.
because every time I would do something away from work, I would feel like I'm wasting my time.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. That
I
definitely,
became
there's a total guilt syndrome associated with that phase. Yeah.
I've been so guilty of it. Like I would get irritated so much if the red light showed like 120 seconds. And like this red light is taken away 2 minutes of my life. I could have done so much. And then only to realize and be like, okay, you know what? Like this is too
Yeah.
stupid. Like
Yeah.
I just feel a lot of times, and I think this is like a lot of founders share this. You have
Mm.
a habit of nerding out on things. One very essential quality you already have is to value your time and then you
Yeah.
nerd out on it.
Yeah.
One is
That's
to
also a
have
journey of self-discovery, so to speak, right? Because certain things can only be devoted so much of time. And you realize that when you start seeing that you don't have bandwidth to do the universe of things that you have to do. So I think everybody figures a pace out themselves with a little bit of hit and trial, and you realize that you can't nerd it out with everything. You've got to delegate and assign only that much that you can do of nerding out to a particular thing.
So these were the problems, but how can you deal with it? And more importantly, how can you strike a balance to build a more sustainable world for yourself as a founder? Here's what Ayush and I discussed about that.
Long time back, there was this friend of mine who very unassumingly suggested this book. You might have read it, Originals by Adam Grant. It is such an underrated book. It was also my introduction to Adam Grant and his, school of thought. And it was almost a movie style breakthrough moment in my life. Just to give you context, I was having a chat with this friend of mine in the initial days of starting out. He probably doesn't even know how much of an impact this suggestion has had in my life. But so he's like, keep everything aside, read this book, and then tell me how you feel about, your entrepreneurial journey. And I feel like life changed because the book gave me a couple of, I think, life mantras that I've almost made a part of my personality now. And I take it as a given daily, right? The first thing the book says that someone who's an original is not that typical person who's coming up with some very novel idea, patented idea that no one's heard about. He or she is challenging status quo, right?
Yeah.
And there is that
Yeah.
one school of thought in the world who will always say, look at anything, look at any concept, look at any product or service and say, but why? Right? And why not this? Right? I can do
Yeah.
it better. And then there is the other side, who are the conformists, who are the kind of people you spoke about, who like the security and comfort of the environments they are in. Right? They're happy taking things as a given. They'll never question. Right? The change makers in the world are the originals, and the conformists are also a huge part of running that world. So once you understand who you are and what journey you are on, everything becomes easier. He says, if you are an original, and that is, so to speak, someone who's creating something or is founding something, then don't think of your life as that one startup idea. The whole journey of becoming an original is changing a mindset, right? Which is to say, a couple of things he says. One, he says, you're always questioning the status quo, right? You take nothing as a given. Two, you will not have confidence in the initial years. It's going to take years and years of building expertise as a founder to then start feeling like, hey, I know what I'm doing, right? Three, he says, the mindset is such that it's not about just the idea you're working on today. You are churning out volumes of ideas daily because your mind functions like that. You're going to throw 50 darts on the board. One will hit, but that one will be breakthrough, right? The fourth, I think he says, is you learn the art of delegation, right? And that starts building confidence in your daily life as well. And the fourth, which I think I've taken very, very seriously, is to have a creative hobby. Anybody who is a original will have a creative hobby that gives them, stimulation and keeps them excited and on their toes daily. A hobby outside of whatever work and venture you're creating, right? And I think these are turning points in my life. And I feel like anybody who's listening to this and is building or is wanting to build, sort of inculcates this attitude. It's a mindset shift in terms of shunning that imposter syndrome and starting to feel a bit more like you belong into this role.
Somebody who is comfortable in in the current status quo, or somebody
Yeah.
who's actually like enjoying the current thing and is not challenging status quo. I at some point do feel envy. I'm not that person, because one thing I've accepted is that if you are that original, or if you are that founder, creator, whatever you might call it,
Yeah.
uh, you're definitely gonna get irritated by challenging everything. Like the other day, I was going to the airport to pick somebody up. I had to get off my car to pay the parking ticket, and I was like, why? Like, and again, like it's not something I want to build a startup on, but just generally these things irk me. Like for somebody for who it doesn't, like it's like, okay, you just do what you're supposed to do, right? Like, but there's so many things that I see every day and it just mess with my head. Why aren't
That's
you
the
doing it?
mindset, right? You're like,
Yeah.
you're constantly challenging it and saying, why is this being done this way? Can it not be done more efficiently?
Like, I have a friend and we've worked in the past, and since whenever, like, when we as people joined the workforce, he's a few years earlier to me, uh, he's been that person who wants to have his coffee every day, wants to enjoy a couple of drinks every weekend, and wants to travel. And this is the extent of money he wishes to earn in life. Even if he gets an option that if I tell him, oh, let's do this, you'll make like
Yeah.
some $1 million or whatever, he is
Yeah.
just not interested
Yeah.
because he understands that his definition of what he likes, he's figured out early
Yeah.
on, and he just is okay with it, right?
Yeah.
Now, when you say things like somebody's made it in life, we very subtly, like most people, very subtly kind of draw a parallel of this person being successful to being rich or being wealthy,
Yeah.
right? Like
Important.
that's just like, I think I am a lot more envious of people who are not capitalists but have broken through these things. They are originals, but their drive is not money.
Yeah.
Their drive is to be happy, and they've just done it because we will go through everything, build businesses, fail businesses,
Yeah.
be in pressure, be spending our time with finance people, lawyers, whatever drama, and then only to realize
Yeah.
कि eventually तो yeah, we need that balance. We need to be happy people and calm people, right? For
Correct.
somebody who can do that, skipping all of this, it's great,
Nothing
right?
like.
Like I remember watching a podcast, Brian Chesky, he was saying like I had my 40th birthday and I had 100 people and I realized I haven't met them in the past year or more. I was about to invite them for my birthday and said it took me like to build a multi-billion-dollar company to realize that I already had the things that will actually make me happy.
Yeah.
I had to distance those things away from me
Yeah.
for me to actually realize what is happiness, what is the definition of happiness for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I'm just trying to be like, I don't care. I will take a sabbatical. I'll go and meet all these 100 people over the next
Yeah.
6 months.
Yeah.
Everybody at some point will feel that it'll be great to like not be there and just be okay. I also want to go to my office, have my coffee, and be like, I
So
want
you're
to
saying
watch
that,
a movie. I'm calling in sick.
so are you saying the journey really is start out as an original, but then somehow make your way to becoming a conformist in life? Is that what you're saying? Because that's an unpopular opinion.
It's very difficult to do that, but if you can do that, that's amazing, right? Like, why?
The early stage, as you have gone through, as I am going through, entails a lot of absorbing that original, mindset, hustling, a very abused word, but the positive connotation of it, but also trying to find what your pace is in the process. You can't be hustling and doing this for 40 years straight. At some point, you're going to have to find a more sustainable way of doing it. And yes,
Yeah.
it's probably impractical to ask someone to find that balance in the initial years because 5 to 7 years just go in trying to figure things out. Finding a balance at that stage means you're not going to be able to build anything. But the process of getting to finding your pace and also figuring out what is it that can challenge your creativity outside of your work as well, so that you take off that original mindset pressure that you have on your head all the time, because you now have two, three things to spread it across over. Right. So you find that, you find your pace, and then eventually the goal should be logically for any person starting out to get to that point where you have gotten to a settled place where
Yeah.
your mind is challenged because it's you're engaged in things that tickle that creative bone. You're doing the things that you want to do, and you have built enough for yourself to be happy with the needs and wants that you had set out for yourself in your life.
You're right. Like, I think the entire journey is about building a certain mindset.
Yeah.
And while you build that mindset, it's a lot more to do with discovering yourself of who you are, right? Like
True.
once you've reached to that point where you know what you like, it's like how an athlete works, right? Like you
Yeah.
can make a ton of money in this country playing cricket, but it's not never gonna feel work. Like
Yeah.
it's always gonna be, it's a pleasure to be able to love what you do,
True.
get rewarded for it, right? Like it's great. Like so the journey a lot of time entails about just to be able to reach to a certain stage. If you are not getting paid anything, you would
Yeah.
still do that.
Absolutely.
But if a byproduct, you're getting paid as well. You have the certain perks of the reward that you've gotten for that high risk that you've taken,
Yeah.
etc. That's what, in my mind, would be success, right? Like
Yeah.
you do what you love. And to our conversation of that journey before, when you go past that stage where materialism as a whole concept stops to attract you,
Yeah.
I feel that's exactly when you kind of weigh in things and be like, okay, I will only do things now that will make me happy.
Mm.
And that could be anything. It could
Yeah.
be like being passionate about a hobby or just creating something, art. Now, no longer your decisions are in parallel with how much money is this going
Yeah.
to make me?
Yeah.
Am I going to become unit positive? Blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I think Vinita Singh always says this, right? She's like, because she's had a whole lineup of startups that didn't go as planned before she landed on the sugar idea. And she always says that as long as you're solving for cash flows in your life, be it your personal life or the business, you're never going to be creating something that's going to be that breakthrough sort of a thing. So the minute that stops, of course, while she does also on the side mention that it's great for financial discipline, and that's very important for founders, obviously, sure, because you get too much money too early, too soon. That can have a whole bunch of other implications. But the thought process there is that financial discipline should be the mindset. But if you're actually on a daily basis only solving for cash flows, and that's what your daily task list looks like, then you're never creating something major. So the minute you reach a point, I think in the initial days where that thing goes out of the window, then you're starting to build. That's where the real creativity comes in. The way that's where the real original thinking comes in. That's where the whole out of the box, approach to things comes in, because you cannot actually afford that kind of thought process.
just remember eventually you're going to die, right? Like, so take life a little less
That's a very
serious.
morbid note to end this conversation on.
Right? Like, what's the point? Like, I can make 1,000 crores
Startup
and
mat
10,000.
banao. See, eventually you're going to die. So
Yeah. So like you're a very small part of evolution in the
yeah,
world, right?
no,
So do
that's true.
what you could do best.
I think you're absolutely right, honestly. And jokes apart, it's about not taking yourself seriously, because when you're starting out, you're just always constantly feeling that, okay, hey, I left that for this, I have this responsibility, I have that financial obligation, I'm overwhelmed by the number of tasks I have to do as a founder. And you start taking yourself so seriously. I remember with the initial times, I used to shun like social invites and not want to meet friends, because I've taken myself so seriously and my journey so seriously that I felt that if I don't have a win to share, I don't want to go. It's going to hamper my confidence, right? And I think most founders struggle with that, and it takes a lot of time to shun that. But you're absolutely right. You detach yourself from what you're building, and then you start taking yourself a little less seriously. And I think
Yeah.
I think it also ties into confidence at some point, right? Because when you stop taking yourself seriously, the markers you assign to success are different. Building confidence is relatively easier. It could be
See,
a smoother journey.
also you'll attract a lot of, so we're all guilty of it as
Yeah.
founders. At some point we've become that person and we've been called out for, yaar tu sirf kaam ki baat karta hai.
Yeah, of
Like,
course. Most
no,
founders are called out for doing that. No one likes
you will
us.
be
We only
called
do
out for
talk talk.
that no matter what. But at the same point in time, I think like when you are come to this mindset of that, okay, everything is in life, like how I put it, it's a game. You got
Hmm.
to have fun, but
Yeah,
you got to win.
yeah,
You go to play badminton, you play to win, but you enjoy that workout and you enjoy it, right? Like, so when you put it like that, what
yeah,
happens is you're automatically attracting better
yeah.
energies, and those better energies also make you interact with people and environment in such a manner that gives you a lot more options. And this is now the capitalist side of me talking. It gives you
Yeah.
a lot more associations and options to go and do better than what you could do, vis-a-vis you being a person who's constantly stressing about things and sharing your stresses and trying to kind of get some
Solve
amount of
for your daily
validation.
problems. Yeah,
There is a need for content which is responsible. There is a need for
yeah,
community that is actually to support each other,
yeah,
which is built wherein kind of saying, let's just go and do our things.
yeah.
And these are the drivers. We can help each other. And then there are people who can pick each other up and get the right vibes and energies,
Absolutely.
because that's exactly what helps you thrive. It's none of the books, none of the
Yeah, true.
yeah, all the podcasts or the books, like whatever we speak are
Mhm.
basically probably something from original, something from psychology of money, something
Yeah,
like we've
yeah,
just had all that information, right?
yeah,
But today I spend a lot of time making sure that my feed shows the right kind of content to me. Because
Yeah.
if I spoil that, then I'm going to get spoiled. Like, it's as
100%.
simple
Yeah,
as that.
100%. You are what you consume now, and that definition has completely changed from food to content, if you ask me, because we're spending so much of our time on our devices. I couldn't agree more, and I feel like for to contextualize that to this whole founder world, because I mean, and circling back to what you said in the beginning, right? There aren't going to be too many people in your immediate surroundings who are going to understand your journey, and that can directly or indirectly contribute to you feeling very dejected and it having an impact on your mental construct, right? And the nature of the job in itself is so incredibly high pressure that it's very easy for the two things to come together and create absolute havoc in your head. So now more than ever, having that support community, having that kind of support ecosystem even in your personal life, that becomes an enabler to you rather than bringing you down, and actually you having the ability to stand up and almost weed out things that are unproductive to your journey the minute
Yeah.
you see it. You nip it right there, because things have a very strange way of creeping up on you and your mental health, and you as a founder can't afford it, right? It's too high pressure in the initial years to allow things like that to take over your mind.
Absolutely. I'm with you on that. Absolutely. I think, and this keeps changing.
Yeah.
At this point, there are a few things like I can perform great at work because I do not let anything get in the way of my workouts, and
Yeah.
I think it's become a form of meditation for me.
Yeah, it's important to have that. Yeah.
A lot of people who cannot get themselves around meditation find your form of meditation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something that you do, we've spoken about it, and I'm hoping to do is to find a hobby that brings me at peace.
Yeah.
And I think really what I practice is I just like to keep my mind completely empty. The other thing is like I like to have no agenda conversations with people who possibly belong from the same tribe of
Very true.
you can originals or found, like it's not doesn't have to be a founder, but basically who come from this school of thought, right?
But
So I
yeah,
think having a
very true.
community and just saying and going and having that conversation for an hour or two over a
Mm.
coffee,
Mm.
that can really flip around my day and make me do things and make decisions that I've been sitting on for the past 3 months.
Right.
So like I said, there are second degree things that have an impact on your performance at
Yeah.
work is a lot more important now to me,
Yeah.
because I'm also becoming a lot more. I follow Tim Ferriss a lot, like in terms of I practice that I'm a slave to my calendar, but I'm very bullish on my time. Like I will only, if it warrants 30 minutes, and it is 30 minutes.
Mm.
But if I'm having a good conversation and I know that's going to bring a positive impact for me on me, I
Yeah.
can have a conversation for 6 hours. That's fine.
Yeah.
Like it's just like those are the things that work for me right now, but these things obviously keep changing.
Obviously, and they
Uh,
probably were. It was probably something else in the early days. So you'll find that creative outlet, or that vent in your life that ideally should be that hobby outside of work, and should also be that supportive community that really gets you, right? Of people
yeah.
who are like-minded, like you said, may not necessarily be only founders, but who have that kind of school of thought and who
Yeah.
understand that desire to create, that desire to question the basics, the desire to build. I think that's important to have that kind of support community around you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Let's Talk Shop. If you're a fellow startup founder and are looking for your founder tribe, that supportive community of visionaries who are creating the mega businesses of tomorrow, Startup Launchpad by Mentorsphere is a mentor led end to end support community for founders just like you. Check out details in the caption of this episode to apply to our exclusive community today.